This episode is brought to you by Prime. What if you had one more chance with the one that got away?
Sam.
You came home.
Based on the best-selling novel from Carly Fortune. Every Year After follows childhood friends Sam and Percy as they reunite in the dreamy, nostalgic lakeside town of Barry's Bay.
Love can be hard to find. So if you're lucky enough to find that person, never let go.
A second chance at first love. Every Year After, now streaming only on Prime.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Hello, and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, journalist and broadcaster Sam Baker. My guest today is the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet. Since starting work at the corporation almost 40 years ago, Lyse has covered all the major wars in the Middle East, reporting from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Israel, Pakistan, Egypt, Libya, and most recently, Gaza. And that's before we get started on the rest of the world, like Sudan, the tsunami in Indonesia. And you may well remember her reporting on the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 from a rooftop in Kyiv. When we spoke, Lyse had recently made it back to Canada via the Egypt-Gaza border before heading back to the UK to promote her first book, The Finest Hotel in Kabul. It's a quietly devastating but utterly humane look at a history of the people of Afghanistan, told through the staff of the Intercontinental in Kabul, where Lyse has been staying since 1988. When she first checked in, the day after her 30th birthday, the man on reception asked her how long she'd be staying. She had no idea. Guess, 6 weeks? She's been there on and off ever since.
If it's your dream, hold fast to your dream. That's your North Star, just until you decide. Or if the forces just become so much that you yourself decide that you're better to take a different path. But don't give up on it until you're really, really sure that you're ready to give up on it yourself.
Lyse joined me for a fascinating free-range conversation about her extraordinary life and career. We talked about finding her North Star, why gender is irrelevant when it comes to reporting war, what nobody tells you about kindness, the moment she realised her job was going to have to come first in her life, female friendship in a war zone, and why even sometimes reporters have to look away. I was thinking when I was reading your wonderful book and reading a couple of interviews that you've already done, it feels to me that the world has gone so crazy that we've lost sight of the women of Afghanistan. Do you feel that?
Oh, wow. I regularly say when I speak at public events, and not just with the book, I make a point of saying, how can we live in a world where we're not up in arms, where we're not protesting about the fact that there is a country in the world where girls are legally or according to the law of the land, not allowed to go to school after grade 6, can't go to university, can't go to many of the jobs, can't go to public parks. It has simply disappeared from our agenda. And there is this way of saturation now. The university campuses and the streets have come alive in protest for Palestinians of Gaza. And my goodness, that is utterly, horribly painful. And of course, we have the privilege to be able to just witness it, not to have to live it ourselves. So we can imagine how great it is if you're, even with our distance, it's very painful. But it's a very selective outrage. And the world just seems we have this strange paradox where never have we had so much information and access to information. And none of us can say now we didn't know because we choose not to know. But at this time of this saturation of information, we also have unprecedented misinformation. And then a colleague of mine, a former BBC colleague, who has set up this new website doing some really powerful, hard-hitting investigative journalism called Coda. Her idea is that noise is the new censorship because there's so much noise and it's so much click and swipe. Our hearts and minds don't seem to be big enough to embrace many crises at the same time, because, of course, there's many, many crises at home. You listen to Radio 4, it's, the migration crisis, the hotels, which, of course, are really, really matter, but all the dots connected because, of course, the migration crisis, a large percentage are Afghans, including Afghan women and children.
Yeah, so it's all joined up, and I think you're absolutely right. There is just so much that nothing goes in because of the avalanche. But I was thinking, about the plight of the women in Afghanistan, and because of the rollback, I wonder how much of it's to do with the rollback of rights in the West of women. That this is not where I meant to go in at all, by the way, but it's just a circumstance.
It's a conversation, so it's good. We can go on.
I mean, so much has changed in the nearly 40 years you've been reporting. What was it like before we go there, tell me a little bit about little Lyse growing up in the east of Canada, because you got from small town Canada to Tehran. How did that happen?
An unliking scenario or plot where I grew up in, kind of Nowheresville on the lovely, small, close-knit community on the east coast of Canada, and then ended up working for one of the world's biggest organizations. And it's still a great source of pride for me. I've been very, very, very fortunate and remain very, very grateful, as and that's not to sound, holier than thou or getting up the moral high ground, especially now when by accident of birth, people end up really on the wrong side of history, on the wrong side of life, with very, very few life chances. I mean, I guess I'll make a very long story short by saying, when I left, small town Eastern Canada, I went to the proverbial big city, looked out, first growing up, looking out to the Atlantic Ocean, to Toronto and Kingston, and looking up high to the skyscrapers. It literally expanded my world. And, I had decided early on that I wanted to become a journalist because for me, who always loved books, when a library opened up in my small town, I was literally the first one at the door. And I signed out the first book, which was on truth, and ran into the park and read it and ran back to the queue to sign out another book. But I still have the late slip from the library, which was a book, How to Become a Journalist. I don't know whether I returned the book, but anyway, I always wanted to be a journalist. So after I graduated I went to Queen's University, went to very good, very elite university, which was a huge culture shock. So I went to Queen's University, lots of, sons and daughters of prime ministers and very wealthy families in Canada, where really I was a fish out of water. And then went to University of Toronto, which of course is a much more cosmopolitan, much more diversity, studying with students from around the world. And after university, I emailed lots of Canadian media, and to it, they all said, "Oh, you need a journalism degree or you need experience." And I didn't want to go to journalism school, and I didn't have experience, and there was a recession in Canada, and I wanted to travel. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, so I took a volunteer posting with Canadian Crossroads International, which was a genuine commitment on my part because I'd studied Africa in my graduate degree. So I went to a small village in Côte d'Ivoire. They sent me there because I speak some French. And then it was a classic. I used to say right place, right time. But of course, we know, especially as women, we shouldn't say right place, right time because it sounds rather winning the lottery. But in fact, you make your own. So when I finished it, I had a long night of pacing the floor. Do I go back? Do I stay? And I decided to stay. And there I was, wrong accent at that time for the BBC, wrong CV. I had no CV, and wrong country. And I make a joke and say, the clouds opened and the angels descended from the sky and they said, "Give Lyse a job." Because the capital, Cote d'Ivoire, the BBC just happened to be opening its first ever West Africa office. And the Correspondent was covering 20 some countries, and he needed some help. And there I was with nothing really, except that I was there. It was at that time when the Independent had just been set up in Britain, and where the idea was that news about Africa, which had been on page 9, should be on the front page. We should really be looking at these stories. And there were a multiplicity of military coups across West Africa. There was the famine in the Sahel. So there was a lot of news. So that's how I began, and I'm still here. So that's why I say to you, when I meet young journalists, I always say, or anyone for that matter, is that especially at the beginning of your life, and when you're holding fast to your dreams, as fragile and precious as they are, you don't take no for an answer. Because everyone said to me, no, 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 no. But I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, and I wanted to make it happen. Of course, I was careful about it. I wasn't reckless. Now, of course, to go out and be a foreign correspondent, you find people going to Ukraine or other countries which are quite dangerous. So I was also fortunate that I started at that time when I could travel as a young woman. There was risks, but not dangers, if you like. So, but I think now it is more dangerous. So that's how it all began, by taking a calculated risk and holding on. And every time someone said no or shut the door, I just kept my eye on the goal.
So how did you know even that foreign correspondent was a job? Because you didn't come from a media family, did you?
I don't know. I guess my sister and I were kind of like Irish twins. We're 11 months apart. And she went into academia. She went on to study at Cambridge University. She's now Canada's leading scholar, the research chair on work, gender and care. And she decided that for her, that was the best way to learn. Whereas I was always the one more book. And I needed something more structured. I needed a deadline, which is like deadline.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
You can't say one more book, one more minute. It has to be there. And for me, this became the best way to pursue my education, to continue to travel. And so the BBC became a kind of passport for me to satiate my curiosity, to go around the world. And I soon discovered there's this great, great privilege in being a journalist, is that you can show up at a door, at a gate, at a place and say, "Hi, my name is Lyse Doucet. I'm a journalist. Can I ask you a question?" And they answer. And offices that I go to, people are opening their hearts and homes at a time of their greatest grief. And so they want to tell their story in the hope that there will, in the telling of it, I have found there is some grace, but also they hope, and sadly it doesn't always end up being the case, that you will change that story for them. And so there's a great responsibility and a privilege. And I very much feel that to this day. I soon discovered that it really is one of the best jobs in the world. It's a hard job, and it's getting harder. In some ways, a lot easier. In some ways, a lot harder. But it's still very much, and it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's really a way of life. And because news happens. Look, like today, I had my schedule all set, and the schedule is often upset. And my greatest regret about journalism is letting people down. I hate letting people down.
Is it possible to live a life out as well, or does life have to take a back seat?
At a certain point, I remember, and I remember the point in which I realized I had to make this decision. In Pakistan, I realized that my work life was very important to me, and my personal life was very important to me. And in some way, my work life and personal life became enmeshed, because all of the places where I worked are not just a story for me. They are woven into my personal life. I made deep, lasting friendships in Africa, where I stayed for 5 years. Then I went to West Asia. I'm still friends with people who were part of my life when I was there on the ground. Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. Then I went to the Middle East. So it became woven through my own life. It sometimes made relationships difficult. I had some very strong personal relationships, some of which came to the point of even, making a lifelong commitment. It didn't work out. If I look back on them, I look back with great fondness, but not with regret. I wasn't ready at the time. They weren't right at the time. But personal relationships, I always say that they have to add to who you are, who both of you are, not subtract who you are. So I've had many strong and very, very important and wonderful relationships. And I have many, many friends who embrace me. And I think we live in a time now where we think actually we have lots of different kinds of friendships with women and with men. And my family, I've just come back from Eastern Canada, is also one of my anchors. I have very strong relationships with my siblings. And we really hold each other close and stick up for each other, stand for each other. And I know they're always there.
Do you feel like you had to make choices as a young woman in the 80s and 90s, comparative, your male peers didn't?
People always ask this question.
Sorry, I slightly hate myself for asking.
Some of my women colleagues refuse to answer that question. I don't think that. I don't blame my women friends say, don't answer that question. Don't. It used to be asked when I lived in Pakistan. So that was in Afghanistan. That was the late 80s, early 90s, where there weren't as many female foreign correspondents, where female correspondents were a bit of a curiosity. We used to say we were the third gender, especially in places where a lot of what happens in women's lives is controlled by men. So we didn't get treated like the men did in their country, but we didn't get treated like the women in their country, but we did have a special status. Because in predominantly Muslim countries, there is in the Quran this idea that women should be protected. So for us as journalists, it translated into getting the front seat on the bus, the front of the plane. And believe me, sometimes when you're flying, in military aircraft over dangerous areas, you wish you weren't in the front of the plane.
I was going to say, how safe is that, really?
And also in societies where, and to this day it is the case, sadly, particularly in Afghanistan, where access to women is controlled by the men who decide who can visit and who cannot. And in societies where, still to this day, deeply traditional societies where women don't see men outside their immediate family, and men don't see, for the most part, many men don't see women outside their immediate family, although that on the men's side, it's changing. So we would get access. So we would be able to go speak to the women. And then almost without fail, when you get access to the women, you find them to be so full of personality and full of convictions and energy and laughter. Then you realize why the men are trying to keep them in the house, because, they would really, if they challenged the men's imposition of these rules. But you cannot say that there is a strict gender divide in how men and women cover war, because I know many men who are as interested in the human side of war as I know women. And that's traditionally ever since the First and Second World War, that women did the hospitals, women did the caring, women did Martha Gellhorn and others smashing through that, Lee Miller. But as women who are more interested in the bombs and the bullets and the ballistics as they are in humans. So I don't think there is a neat gender divide. But I do know that, for example, when I go to stories now, and my dear friend and colleague, we're kind of professional twins, Lindsay Hilsum, who's Channel 4's international editor, when we go to the same places, we almost always ask the same questions and do the same kind of stories. And we cooperate a lot, even though I suppose you could say we're competing media. But because I also very much firmly believe, and I've tried to adhere this, obviously I'm a journalist and I realize it's a very competitive profession, but for the most part, I try to be cooperative rather than competitive, especially in areas of high risk, because in the end, we really are in this together. And, that old expression, what goes around comes around, that, my kindness to you will be reciprocated in kindness back to me. So, because, if you're not going to enjoy it, why do this job? If you're going to be going around and thinking darkly of your colleagues and that, I would feel like a terrible person. And why would I make myself feel that way? So, and again, I'm not trying to be, Miss Congeniality or anything. It's just a better way of working. And
yeah, no, Lindsay came on the podcast actually quite a while ago, right? She was one of the very early guests. And I think she mentioned you and her friendship with you. It struck me then that, there's you and her and Ola Guerin, and there was, of course, Mari Colvin. Do you think there was something, this is a really facetious way of putting it, but I can't think of another way to put it. Was there something in the water? Because this amazing generation of female international correspondents, you were all of the same age, weren't you? And at a point when there weren't loads of women coming through.
Liz Blunt was also there in Africa when I was there. You have Alex Crawford, mother of 4 children. What's different in this generation is that in my generation, which includes Marie and Orla Guerin, and most of us haven't had children. And in my case, I would have found it really hard, really, really hard to say no to a child. I'm going out the door and implying that going out the door was more important than not going out the door. But this generation, there are more women who have children, and I admire them for juggling. It means they need good husbands to take care of the, to share the parenting. And there is some good for children to know that their mother goes out to work and that they spend equal time with their father. But you can see generation on generation. In fact, Lindsay and I get a little bit irritated, maybe not irritated, a bit surprised when we still get women studying journalism, and sometimes men, who send us emails and say, I'm doing my thesis on women in war, women in journalism. And we both say that there should come a time where we shouldn't ask that question anymore. I always see gender as like part of our personality. And some women are more outgoing. Some of them speak languages. Some of them are attached to certain stories. Some of them ask questions. Gender is just part of our mix. And as I said before, you cannot divide strictly journalism. Journalism and gender are not in strict alignment.
I heard you talking about kindness in journalism.
Sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, the cliche of journalism, yeah, and certainly some of the things we see happening now, where some journalists are so interrogative to the point of aggression. That's not a gender thing. That's just a personality thing, or how the boss makes you feel thing.
If there are any times when I feel like quitting my job, it's when there is backstabbing, when there is this kind of stuff behind the scenes, when people try to undermine you. I hate it. One of my colleagues says, oh, Lyse just likes everyone to get along. And again, it's my point. Why do it? If you feel that you're looking over your shoulder, and it happens less, but it still happens. And I do, now that I'm of an older generation, I do, there was one or two times where my editor said, Lyse, this was a teaching moment that I try with younger colleagues who I hear are very competitive. And again, I'm not trying to be Mother Teresa or anything. I just think it's better for journalism. And because, the guilty secret of kindness is that you end up feeling better yourself when you're kind to someone. Being kind to others, yes, it makes them feel good, but it makes you feel even better. I feel terrible when I am not nice. Maybe it's, bred in the bone. Maybe it's grew up in a small town, a Catholic family. We are who we are. And maybe some of my colleagues are in February 2022 when Russian troops would be on the street. Starting at 2 a.m, my, female colleagues, Clarissa Ward, Lindsay Adario, they started calling. I started calling them. I called my male colleagues too. I called everybody. Lindsay. In fact, Lindsay then said, don't do a Marie. And I said, Lindsay, this is not a Marie Colvin kind of situation. I had, talked to our high-risk people. Do we have enough water? Do we have enough food? Do we have a route out if the Russians come in? And, I knew that we had everything ready. But, what some of my colleagues said, oh, your colleagues are calling you just because they're worried that if you don't leave, that they'll get in trouble with their editors if you're there and they've left. I'm not as cynical as that. Yes, it is an element. And we often say in this business that the most courageous person is the one who says, I can't stay. It's just, I feel scared. I'm scared. I'm leaving. And I think if you're scared, then you have to say it, and we respect. But I said, no, they're not just calling me because of that. They're friends, and we want to care for each other. We want to know, does everyone have a way out? So I just think it's better. Other people, it goes over them. I don't make judgments about other journalists who prefer to be competitive. That's what their editors want. They feel their journalism is better. I mean, there's all these stories in the BBC years ago, how fellow correspondents, and at that time it would have been men, would steal other correspondents' chartered planes, would steal their on the bus. I mean, it's horrific. And we still talk about those moments. And those journalists are now gone. They're not working with us anymore. But it leaves such a bad taste. Again, with Lindsay, and during the Syrian war, when Lindsay would go to Syria, she'd come back and she would tell me the stories she did and how she did them, and the stories she didn't do and how I could do them. And similarly with me. I would give her contacts, and I helped Marie Colvin when she went to Afghanistan for the first time because she said her colleagues wouldn't help her. Of course I helped her. Of course I opened my books. Again, journalism is a way of life, and if we have to become terrible human beings in the process, well, that's really, really, here we are trying to make the world a better place, and we can't even make our own place a better place.
Yeah. Have you ever kind of looked at the risk and thought, it's too much, it's not worth it?
Yeah, there was one time I remember that I was working with a producer, and she said, let's go to the border of Mali. Let's go to West Africa. We're going to go to the border of either Mali or Niger, and where there was people had just been kidnapped. Islamic State was there, very, very wild. And I just looked at it and I thought, no, I'm not going. And she kind of was surprised. And I said, no, it's too risky. There has been this expression in journalism, as long as there's been journalism in wars, which is no story is worth dying for. But in the Syrian war, there came a new expression, which is no story is worth dying for, but there are stories worth taking risks for. And the tragedy of that was, I may be wrong, but my memory is that it was first coined by a brilliant Arab American journalist, Anthony Shadid, who wrote so beautifully and had not grown up speaking Arabic, but had learned Arabic. And he was writing magnificent stories. And he put that in the New York Times. 1 week later, he was dead because he found a way to get into Syria. The only way to get out, because he'd been smuggled in, was to come out on horses. He was asthmatic and allergic to horses. He thought he could do it, but he did. He died on his horse. And Tyler Hicks, one of our preeminent war correspondents, Tyler Hicks, tried to bring him back to life and couldn't. Can you imagine? And then a week later, Marie Colvin was dead, killed by that missile, which is widely believed to have been fired. It wasn't accidental. It was targeted at her when they hit the house, Remy Oshlik. Many Syrians also died in what was called a safe house turned into makeshift hospital and makeshift media house. And Marie had gone in with the very brave and very brilliant Paul Conroy. They came out, and Marie made that mistake of going back in. And so there is this sense of which, when you say there are stories worth taking risks for, that in this profession and in this time, you only really know the risks once it's too late. And there is that sort of really, really profound sense of understanding that it's kind of, I'm going to stay one more day. I'm going to turn right rather than left. I'm going to stop in this cafe, or I'm not going to stop. It's sometimes the decision turns like this. It's measured in inches and minutes, those kind of split second decisions. And when the stories come out and people live to tell the tale, they often say, well, I was coming out of Syria and we made a last minute decision to stop at this rest house for a coffee. And that's when they got kidnapped. Or like Marie made a decision to go back in. She had done this story. Paul Conroy said, we've done it. It's too risky. And Marie says, that famous expression that she told to Lindsay. Lindsay must have told you the story. It's what we do. And she went in.
This episode of The Shift is sponsored by Shopify. When I think back to starting The Shift, I can hardly believe I did it. I knew nothing. What was I thinking? Was anyone going to listen? Not to mention the fact that I had to figure it all out on my own. For a moment there, it was almost too overwhelming. But despite the 3 a.m. terrors, making the decision to go for it was one of the best things I ever did. And it really helps to have a partner like Shopify on side. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, from big names like Skims to startups like Upcircle, one of my favorite skincare brands. Its design studio has hundreds of ready-to-use templates to help you build a beautiful online store. And setup is super fast with their built-in tools that help edit product photos and captions. Plus, it's all in one place. Inventory, payments, analytics, campaigns. The whole thing just makes your life a lot easier. And if, like me, it's just you, Shopify will help you easily create email and social media campaigns to get the word out. And if you get stuck, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 customer support team are there to help you. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your £1 a month trial and start selling today at shopify.co.uk. Go to shopify.co.uk. That's shopify.co.uk. has your approach to it changed as you've got older? Has it changed?
No, I don't think it's changed. I remember a colleague when I first started out in West Africa, when I wanted to rush off to Liberia in the wake of a military coup where there was literally, people being beheaded and people with machetes. And he accused me. He said, "You have no imagination." And of course, then I didn't. I come from a school in Canada. I was at university in Canada. I just come and worked as a volunteer. I couldn't imagine the worst. Now I can. I've seen it close up. But now the environment in which we operate on in terms of security is so different. We carry flak jackets in the most dangerous of places. We bring high risk advisors with us. We do risk assessments. It's carefully calculated. And as I mentioned, I myself do my calculations. And sometimes it just comes out, like, for example, the fall of Kabul, August 2021, when so many people, even people I knew who had spent decades in Afghanistan, were leaving. I just said, I don't think it's dangerous. Every bone in my body says that the Taliban are not going to do anything to us as foreign journalists. And of course they didn't. They welcomed us. They took care of us, or we took care of ourselves and they didn't interfere with us. So sometimes it comes out of long experience. Sometimes it comes from just a certain understanding and a certain sort of a weighing up of the risks and reward, or most times it's the risks. But you take a risk. But in my case, I'm not, some colleagues like Alex Crawford, they take big risks, huge respect to her. She takes big risks. Her organization, her high risk people allow them to take those risks. There's been many times where the BBC has not allowed us going further, and other organizations do and live to tell the tale. And I always say that we have to make a decision, to all of us. There was one decision recently. And also we work with local people who are from the country. In Afghanistan, we work with an Afghan. In Syria, we work with a Syrian. In Sudan, we work with a Sudanese. So you work with people who, it's literally red in the bone. They know the country and they know the risks far better than I will ever know. So you also depend on them a lot, including your drivers, who can make the difference and have more than once made the difference between life and death.
Wow. I'm just thinking, wow, it puts most other people's jobs to shame, doesn't it? How, you've talked a lot about kind of collaboration, and particularly with Lindsay. Is that kind of friendship, female friendship or otherwise, is that increasingly important to you? Or has it always been a linchpin of your work?
As I said, I don't see the world on gender lines, but there is something about sisterhood. I was just somewhere, where was I? Where I said to people, there is something wonderful about the sisterhood. And the relationship, I have a very strong relations with my sisters. They have an equality about them. We can be both tribal as well as global. So you do talk about different things, and I'm still very close to. I have calls on a regular basis with women friends in Canada, women friends in Australia, women friends in different parts of the world. And the conversations are different than with the men, but they both have their own beauty and strength.
Tell us a bit about the Lyse who first walked into the Intercontinental in 1988, age 30, weren't you?
So I had, by then I'd worked 5 years for the BBC as a reporter in West Africa. I somehow managed to get to London. I couldn't find any way then, even back then, many years ago, decades ago, everyone said, "Oh, Lyse, you're Canadian, it'll be easy." But in fact, I couldn't find a way, and I ended up a British diplomat in Nigeria felt sorry for me, and he got the Foreign Office to sponsor me so I could come to England to London with a work permit for 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, I'd had a friend who had said to me one time, "Oh, Lyse, Pakistan is in your karma." But there was not really a role for me in Pakistan, but I just felt that I should go to Pakistan. And I went around to all the language services, the Urdu, the Pashto, the Persian, saying, "Well, I'm thinking of going to Pakistan." "Oh, thank you, Lyse. We already have somebody there. Thank you, but no, thank you." And I was just so convinced that this was on my life path. So I went to a place called Quetta in southern Pakistan, where no one really had reported from. There were hardly any journalists there, but a lot of Afghans were based there, including Hamid Karzai and others who went on to assume really important roles in the future of Afghanistan. And there I was in Quetta. And then I started filing stories to the BBC, and they went, oh, that's interesting. Oh, Lyse is filing from Quetta. Oh, we didn't know that about Quetta. Then Benazir Bhutto came back, and then I was brought into the reporting on Pakistan. Benazir Bhutto came back, martial law ended, democracy returned, all these amazing, amazing stories at the time. And of course, the Afghan war. So I did a lot of work. I met a lot of Afghans, was immediately taken by this real sense of character of the Afghans, their sense of self, their sense of hospitality among the women as well as the men. But as I write in the preface to the book, then the BBC Pakistan job came up and I applied for it, but I was still too junior, and someone more senior than I got the job, and he wanted his girlfriend to come, and he said, I want Lyse out of Pakistan. There's no work for Lyse anymore. And then a friend who, I don't say who, but a UN envoy, and contacted people in Kabul who no one was getting visas then, especially not the BBC, Western media were finding it really hard to get to Kabul. So they got me an Afghan visa, and it came, in December, and I got it. So I had to use it. Christmas Eve was my birthday, Christmas, of course. So I found myself going to Afghanistan, and I'd never been there before. And of course, I was warned by some of the Mujahideen, we'll be there soon, we're about to win, we're going to get, we're coming to Kabul. And other Mujahideen said, oh my God, you're going to get killed there, don't go. But I wanted to go. And so then I found myself suddenly in this huge world story in Kabul. And at that point in late December, one of the few journalists, although then as the weeks went on, they opened up more and there were more journalists by the time February 15th, 1989, which was the date for the Soviet troop pullout, at that time, Cold War was the top story. But I'd been told there were only two places to stay, and I didn't know anything about Kabul. So it was that kind of second decision. I went to the hotel. It was just dark, gloomy, gloom of the hotel. And, I still remember, and that's how I start the book. I still remember standing in the lobby and the receptionist in this, dull brown suit sort of saying, well, and how long will you be staying, ma'am? As they always do. And I just standing there thinking, oh my God, how long am I going to stay here? Not knowing 6 weeks, 6 days, 6 months. And I ended up staying nearly a year and was so taken in, again, by the character of Afghans. And working for the BBC then, where 95% of Afghans were listening to the BBC in Persian or Pashto, which meant that it was a huge, as a journalist, huge meaning, because you knew that everything you were reporting was not just landing in Western capitals. Afghans kept coming up to me and whispering, it's going to get better, it's going to get better. So you felt this huge sense of purpose and meaning. And of course, it was also hugely momentous times. And because I ended up staying there a long time, journalists would come and see me in my room, and we'd work back to what we were talking about before. I worked with them. I had more contacts. I'd been there. I had a better sense of the place because I was there, as we say. I remember it was the first time I heard that British expression, Lyse, you there for the duration? And I thought, the duration? What does that mean? Like, how long is the duration? Anyway, so that's how it started. And then the Pakistan job came up because the guy who pushed me out ended up being not filing very much, not being very good, and he ended up leaving. So I said, well, I'll go to Pakistan as long as Afghanistan is also part of my brief. And they agreed. And then that meant 89 to 93, I was the Pakistan-Afghanistan correspondent. So kept going back to Afghanistan, to the hotel.
I mean, you really had the courage of your convictions, didn't you? Every time, you were meant to be in Pakistan, so you just went. Are you still like that?
I don't know. We say, again, Lindsay and I, if I ever wrote a book, but I would never write a book about journaling, I'd call it the pain. And it's something which is physical. You can feel it, that when something happens that in a place that you care about, you want to be there, and you feel it physically. And sometimes you curse it because you've just agreed to a big family reunion, or sometimes it's for people when they're about to get married or whatever, and something happens and they go, oh, and it's really hard to press down on this pang, to get rid of this pang. And you both celebrate it and curse it because the pang means that it matters to you. And it's nothing better than being on a story that also matters to the world, matters to you personally. But it can also, back on our first conversation, both Lindsay and I say the worst part of our job is letting people down. But yeah, it's, whether you believe in destiny or, the Afghans, believe in kismet, God's will that's written in the book, or serendipity or synchronicity or something that, I grew up with a mother, very much Catholic. But a lot of religions where they say, it was meant to be and whatever. You just have to follow. Again, it's back to, I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. So, that was my North Star. I just kept going.
Do you believe in kismet?
I don't know. I guess I am. Things meant to be. Everything has a purpose. I grew up in a religious, but not in a religious ruled kind of household, but a believing household. I grew up going to church. I became an altar boy before the Pope said that girls could be altar boys. Went to mass every day. When I was in Afghanistan, I went to mosques with my women friends. In Jerusalem, I went to synagogue with Jewish friends. So I do. I'm still a believer, and I love serendipity, synchronicity, or whatever you call them, sliding doors, and I think you have to. What does the Quran say? I use the phrase in the book. Believe in God, but tie up your camel. So you have to go back to what I said about right place, right time. You also have to make your own life. You have to do the work. If you expect something, I can't sit at home and expect something to come to me. I have to also be prepared to be on the way there when it comes to me.
Yeah, it's like that. What is that saying? I think it's, like writers waiting for the muse to strike. And I can't remember who said it, but it was somebody like Hemingway, but I'm not sure it was Hemingway. That basically, but I need to be sitting in my chair ready to write if the muse strikes.
Oh, yeah.
That's like, it's no point being in the pub.
Yeah.
Why the hotel? Why did you choose the hotel as the anchor for the story?
Well, I was trying to find ways to tell this story. And I think we discussed that about how, every time when I go to a place, I'd read novels or narrative history, because I thought that was the best way to make characters come alive on the streets, a living history. And it was also at the time of news avoidance. People were turning away from the news. There was click and swipe. And, I was at a time where in my own work, every time I would go somewhere new with producers, I'd say, right, how are we going to do this story? Let's think about new ways to tell the story. So in looking at a book for the first time, I also was trying to explore new ways of telling old stories in a way that the characters could come alive. And initially I looked at the palace, Kasariye, Palace Number One. It would have been a great name for a book, Palace Number One, because I'd spent time with presidents all through the different periods, but there wasn't enough. A, I hadn't spent enough time, and B, not enough of the history went through the palace. And so it just seemed, I don't know, one thing led to another. The hotel was my first Afghan home. I'd spent time there. I knew people there. I kept in touch with people there. And I checked with Afghans, no matter how much time I spend in a country, I always go back to the people of that country where, the culture is bred in their bones. They will always know it more than I do, whether this was a suitable prism. And they said yes. And the more that I looked at the hotel, the more I knew that it was a place where history lived within it, was made within its walls and outside its walls. And it could be a prism to tell a story. And of course, it's a familiar prism. Everyone loves a hotel. We all love we're going to be honest, we love a luxury hotel. So it was also a prism that wasn't strange to people. They could relate to it, especially in the days of the kingdom when it was a proper intercontinental hotel. Now, hotels have been used before, this Hotel Rwanda and whatever, but it has, I hoped it hadn't been used too much or too recently. But the reaction has been that, people think it's, because I don't know whether I've always believed, and some of my producers used to make fun of me that, I'd say the story of Bamiyan is the story of Afghanistan. The story of this street is the story of Sudan. Is that a small story can tell a much bigger story. And in going down to the smaller story, you can tell a much more detailed, much more human story in a way that tells that carries much bigger truths. And that's what I was aspiring to do. And I was even surprised, later my publisher said to me, Lyse, I wasn't quite sure, when we bought the rights to your book, whether there would be enough history in the hotel. But then, we all were surprised the more I dug down into it. And, the arc of the book is how the hotel is above it all. Then it's sort of, then it's kind of hit. It's sort of scratched a little bit, bruised a little bit. Then it's hit a little, so it's injured a little bit. And then it's, smack on the front line with the war kind of going right through it. So that was also part. It also told the story of it. And the fact that it's a very Afghan hotel, the fact that it's still standing. So many buildings were left in rubble or completely gutted, blackened, and had to be. But the hotel, aside from a few times where it had to shut for renovations, it kept going.
Yeah, no, I think it really beautifully, both the hotel and then the stories of the people who work in the hotel, they really bring it to life. And I think, I don't know that people really know how cosmopolitan Afghanistan was in the 70s.
Or even that it was a kingdom. Sometimes even people who, I'm always surprised when people, well, maybe not surprised because it's people have taken their eyes off Afghanistan, where I'll say, well, it used to be a kingdom. And it's so back in time. And also the Cold War. And, during the Soviet invasion, the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, I was constantly thinking about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan because there were so many parallels. And the extent of the modernity and the extent of, of course, there's a whole wave of nostalgia now because if you go on social media, Afghans are posting pictures of the women in miniskirts, and because they want to tell the Taliban, you're saying that we have all these conservative traditions, but look at this. Look at Afghan women going to university. Look at us. We got voting rights before many Western countries. Look at how Afghan women used to be before, and you're denying that this is part of our culture. So it was really important for me that I tell that story properly.
You have barely a walk-on part in your book. And you just said just now, if I wrote a memoir, which I wouldn't, it would be called The Pang. Why are you so keen to keep yourself out of it?
I don't think my story is exceptional in any way. There are, for those who are outside my world, perhaps they do, but in my world, like Lindsay and I both, we have this idea that it's kind of a default position of publishers. They'll say, oh, we'd love a memoir. We've both been asked many times. And some journalists do write memoirs. And when I set out, I wanted it not to be about me. But of course, I'm mindful that people know that in certain periods I'm there. And so they will wonder where was Lyse? What was she doing? But it was when I got to the chapter of 88, 89, where I was so much involved in the hotel. And I realized if I was going to properly tell like the story of Amanullah's cartoons, I was the one who received most of the cartoons. And the story of, what happened with the British embassy and the journalists leaving, that I had to say that I was there because I think readers would want to know and because it helped to tell the story. And it just came naturally in the same way that it came naturally when I was writing, that it came to using some of the conventions of writing a novel. When I got to that section, I remember that I was Lyse Doucet. I was a person with one name, and it was Lyse Doucet. And that's how they pronounced it, because that's how they heard it in Dari and Pashto on the BBC. So in effect, it became almost the third person. And because I kept everything, the letter from the British Embassy, all the cartoons, all the room service bills, all the telexes. I made passing reference, like at the Loya Jirga in 2002, when our marquee was swept off. It was where I was broadcasting. And when I came, occasionally I remind the reader that I'm here, but the story's not about me, but just to tell you, I'm here. And then later, I deliberately brought myself again at the very end, which is largely to protect the staff, because I wanted to make clear to the Taliban that when they spoke to me about suicide bombings, about their dreams, about their concerns, they told it to me rather than them embarking on an investigation of staff who are still there. Did you speak to Lyse Doucet? Is she the one you... So it was clear that he told me. I was sorry, which was true because I heard it too. But there were other stuff that others told me. And I was just hoping that if I make clear that what was told to me, that would make it clear that I was the one. And so they'll think, okay, all that other stuff. And I had long conversations with them anyway. But it was to put a separation between the staff who were still there and would fear repercussions and me.
When did you last go to Afghanistan?
So it was about 2 years ago, and actually I thought I would be there now, and I've been trying to go back, and what's happening is that they don't want journalists there now. It's very difficult for us to get in. My colleague from our India bureau, she's from Mumbai, she's Indian, but she's a very, very, very good correspondent. She got her visa very easily because I think they seem to not want people who have been there a long time. Christina Lamb, who has spent a lot of time there, I heard her say that she applied 5 times and has been rejected 5 times. But of course, Christina still continues to write a lot about women. In my case, some of the senior Talibs, like the foreign minister, advisors to the supreme leader, who know me from the 90s, who met me recently, who say, yes, of course, Lyse was part of Lyse. Of course, Lyse should come in. But there are others who say, no, she might be critical, because those are the ones who don't want any criticism, don't want any media. And so there's been this tussle back and forth where they say, yes, you'll get one. No, you won't get one. You have to sign a thing saying you're not going to. And it's like, I'm sure I will get there, but it's just taking a long time.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
So you really have, haven't you, lived your life? I don't want to say uncertainty, because that's not absolutely not right, but like never quite knowing what's next.
I think there's less of that now, and which is how it has happened to turn out, but it's also how I prefer it to turn out, because now the BBC has many more correspondents based in the country. We have many more local bureaus than we did before, proper bureaus. Like when I went to Afghanistan in 1989, there was no BBC bureau there. And my presence there meant we then set one up. And now we have, some of our programs are presented from Singapore, from Washington. So when something major happens, there's other people who can go. Now, I'm still asked on the big ones, and there's still ones where I can put up my hand. Like, for example, when their Canadian elections were announced in Canada, I put up my hand and said, I'd like to be part of the mix. I'm Canadian. I know the story. If something happens in the Middle East, I'm usually one of the first they will call. But, I used to go for natural disasters in Southeast Asia. They don't need to ask me now because we have correspondents there. We have a full bureau with presenters and correspondents in Singapore. They can get there much more quickly than I can. Sensible broadcasting. My career has also been defined by my seeking out places which are hard to get to and where not many people want to get to. But they're places I want to go. Like, for example, Iran. Iran has always been part of my reporting. I literally, in 1988, when I was in Pakistan, I literally took out a map and looked to see where the BBC didn't have anyone and where I could go. I remember looking at a map. And now, of course, our BBC office in Iran was closed down. So for many years, I had like a secondary job, which was trying to get visas to places which don't want us. And I recently did get a visa to go back to Iran for the first time in 10 years. And then for a while, I was one of the few who get a visa to Saudi Arabia. I got into Sudan. So I still do focus on the hard to get to places where, by dint of my contacts, my position, personal relationships, I'm able to get to places. Sudan is really difficult to get into. And then, of course, you have to try to get visas to 3 countries which don't want journalists in a week. We move mountains. They move mountains. And, and you go on those trips and you go for a week to 10 days and you sleep 3 hours a night and you're constantly on the move. And so, but when I come back, I do have space, so I get less of the calls where, like Gaza, the morning of October the 7th, Lyse, have you heard the news? Yes. Yeah. Well, you have to get on a plane, go now, like pack, go. So that used to be a lot of my life. Now there's less of it. There's still there, but less of it now. And also I can say no. And sometimes I do say no, but it's like on the morning of October 7th, 2023, my editor called and he said, Lyse, you've got to go. It's really big. And I said, okay. But the opportunity cost is I just got a visa for Afghanistan. And as you know, I've been waiting. At that point, it was a year, 2023. And he said, oh, okay, we'll send someone else. And then an hour later, he called back and said, no, You got to go.
No, you've got to go. Can you imagine not wanting to do it, not wanting to be out there? Because you get so, when you're talking about it, you're so fired up and energized.
I still like being part of the conversation, but I'm also mindful. First of all, there's a whole new generation coming up, but I'm still called in. And this is where I use my experience of years to step back and to comment. Of course, my kind of journalism and all of my colleagues, whether it's Alex Crawford or Lindsay Hilsum or Christina Lamb, whatever, for all of the dazzling changes in technology, which make it possible to report from anywhere. You don't have to be on the ground. That face-to-face on the ground in the heat and the dust, there is no alternative to it. That is really the best way and really the only way to the best kind of journalism. So of course I want to be there. But, I'm also cognizant that, especially now with the BBC, is that on a big story, you get up for breakfast TV and you work through to the 10 o'clock news. And in the middle, you've got to do the 6 o'clock news. You've got to do the World Service Radio. You've got to do the news channel. You've got to do podcasting. You've got to do live page. It's endless, the number of requests. And the BBC tries to, they say in a story like that, where there's only you, they will say, okay, right, these are the priorities. Focus on packaging, focus on this, focus on that. But then there's always someone who's going to call up and say, oh, Lyse, could you? And
just fit this in.
A radio program that I do a lot for, I'll say, okay, fine, it's possible, I'll do it for you too. But, when you're on the road for the BBC these days, from the moment you wake up in the morning and open your eyes to the moment at night where you finally close your eyes, you are on the job. It is non-stop, deadline after deadline. It's really a lot.
Are you knackered?
Sometimes I am, but there's something that keeps me going. But at a certain point, like when I went to Ukraine, it was like, I don't know, I was there for 7 weeks, and doing from Today program to 10 o'clock. It keeps you going because when it's moving history, when you don't know what's going to happen, when there's such, like we didn't know what was going to happen in Ukraine. And, Gaza is unbearably painful, which makes it harder, I think. So I think it's worked for me that I'm not always going from one side. I do take breaks in between. And when I'm in London, some of my correspondents who are in regional bureaus, when they come back from a trip, they can just kind of relax and then prepare for the next one. When I'm in London, I'm still here. So like today, I'll do the 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, maybe later. And once I'm in the building, I get asked to do other things. I mean, you have to say no. And I do say no sometimes. Somebody will say, can you do the 11? I'll say, no, I'll do the 2. Because I know once I get in, I'm not going to be leaving till midnight. There's either that you work for an organization which does too little, or you work for an organization which does too much or asks too much of you. And I prefer to be with the one who asks too much than the ones where you think, hi, me, remember me? I'd like to, hey, would you like something? No, we're not doing that story. No, we don't have any resources. No, we don't.
I would so like to talk to you for hours, but I'm going to lose you to your actual job any minute. So I'm just going to quickly ask you the questions I always ask at the end. What is your emotional age?
Sometimes I still feel like I'm in my 20s, in the sense I'm still curious. I haven't lost my sense of humor. Haven't lost my sense of self. I wake up every day. I mean, I know it sounds pathetic, but when I come back from a trip and I walk in my neighborhood, I think, oh, wow, I'm so lucky. I live here. Oh, wow, look, I live next to this pond. I live next to the canals. And wow, I'm so, I still am full of gratitude. I'm relieved that I am where I am, that I don't have to think, about another foreign posting. I've got, a position in the BBC. I'm not fighting for my job in the BBC. I've established a reputation now. I haven't lost that sense of excitement, the buzz. I like being part of the conversation. I still am thrilled to be in the march of history. I still, when I go to places and I'm talking to people in the know, it's a huge sense of both privilege, but also that sense of that frisson of, history's being made and you're not somewhere on the margins, you're right smack in the middle. It's one of the gifts. It's one of the gifts of journalism. And it's a gift I hold like a China teacup. Respect is a very fragile thing.
Give us a book recommendation. Can be anything.
I'm reading Alif Shafak's There Are Rivers in the Sky now. I adore Alif Shafak.
Wonderful, isn't it? Wonderful book. And she's a wonderful person too.
She's like my guru. When I go to book festivals, I sign up for everything that Elif is in, because she gives me hope. And she has this wonderful way of emphasizing the power of stories, the power of people coming together. And she has this calm way of engaging with the world.
What advice would you give younger women?
Don't take no for an answer. Don't give up on your dreams, especially when you're starting out, because the dreams are the fuel that keeps you going. Keep your eye on what you want to do, and your dreams can change. The lovely thing about trying to chart our own path is that we can take another fork in the road. But so many times in my life, I was told no, and I turned it into a yes. And also take risks, but calculated risks, not reckless risks. You have to push yourself in your early years. You have to decide. People when I first came to England, people said, "Oh, I'd really like to do what you were doing." I was really shocked people said it. It wasn't a kind of phrase I heard a lot in Canada. "Oh, I'd really like to be doing what you're doing." And I would say, well, do it. There is that, I don't know whether it's something in the culture. I think it's changed now. So I think at the start, just, to put in a capsule, turn a no into a yes. If it's your dream, hold fast to your dream. That's your North Star, just until you decide. Or if the forces just become so much that you yourself decide that you're better to take a different path. But don't give up on it until you're really, really sure that you're ready to give up on it yourself. Or you find something else which is just as good, if not even better.
Who is an older woman who's inspired you?
I don't know. When I was growing up, in Canadian journalists, there was Anne Medina, who worked for the CBC, and she was based in Beirut. Did that somehow play on my mind? And we had a very well-respected presenter, journalist, Barbara Frum, who had a program called The Journal. And she also was someone that I admired, that I watched her work, and liked the combination of both elegance as well as eloquence. That she was a very good journalist, but she was also, very feminine in the way that she did it. I think it's possible to be both female and journalists.
What's your superpower?
I think not giving up. I think, and just getting up and picking myself up. I think it's really, just trying to rise above it all. Sometimes it's hard, really hard, and you get down. You feel sad. You feel, that things are not going to work out, and you shouldn't compare yourself to others. We all do it. Compare ourselves to others. Think badly of ourselves. But I try to stay in my lane. And keep my eye on that North Star. I think that's my superpower.
I'm just going to cheat and ask you one more thing before the last question. We've talked about, the kind of avalanche of news, and we talked right at the beginning about, in fact, the world feels like it's gone a bit mad. Do you ever want to look away?
I do look away. I do, and I've said this in public speeches, that there are times when I've turned the dial. I still am a traditional radio listener. I turned the dial, or on that Sounds app, moved my finger away from Radio 4, Radio 5, or World Service, and went to Radio 3 and listened to classical music. And you need those moments, but we cannot turn away, because we need to sometimes turn away for our own mental health and to embrace other things of life, which are still there. In my case, it's the beauty of the canals, it's enjoying good food, it's having coffee with friends without fearing that a missile is going to land, or a bullet's going to whistle past. But we're citizens in a democracy. And one of the responsibilities of being a citizen and as a democracy is that you cannot take for granted the values that we hold dear. You have to also be part of that democracy, in the sense of knowing what is going on, asking questions about what is going on. There is no way that we can do as they did in the 1930s and said, well, we didn't know. We choose not to know. And therefore, I'm a journalist. I have to know. So I do go back, even last night I came back from Canada. And, I did work when I was there, but I still enjoyed the beauty of the Bay, being with family. People also say to me, Lyse, do you feel guilty when you come back? I don't feel guilty, because this is what people in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Sudan, in Somalia, and so many other, this is what they want. They want a normal life. They want to go out with their family, their friends. They want to just sit on the beach or go up the mountains without fear of losing their lives. They want a normal life. And if we don't embrace and celebrate we call them the little joys or the threads of our own life, then what are they worth then? We have to value them because it's what others value as well and what they're literally fighting for. And so I do embrace them. You have to, otherwise life's not worth living. You have to really, I just have to hope, sometimes I think, where are the places that aren't affected by Trump or by protest or by these attacks on democracy? Other things still thrive and we should help them to thrive.
I think we could talk about this for hours. Last one, and it feels slightly spurious to ask you this given what you've just been saying, but how many fucks do you give?
In what sense?
How much do you care? You obviously care a huge amount about the world.
I care a lot. I'm not going to put my head under the duvet and I'm not going to escape. Sometimes I think I'll escape to my little cottage on the bay on the east coast of Canada, but I can't. I'm a journalist and I have many years of experience. I spend a lot of time, as someone who spends a lot of time in war, I also spend a lot of time with the people who try to make peace. I go to off the records with mediators. I go to off the record mediation conferences where I'm often the only journalist there. I really try to, I can't cross the line because I'm not a mediator, I'm a journalist. But, and I use my skills as a moderator, as a journalist, asking questions. I have my little niche in life. And I think we all have a responsibility to use whatever powers are in my small little niche, because I think it is drop by drop. The ocean, what do they say, bird by bird, or, they have a proverb in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's full of proverb, katra katra derya mesha, drop by drop, the river is made. So I've got my drop and I've got to hold that drop and not let it drop down the cliff.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Stitch Fix. Stop shopping, get styled.
A+ on the outfit, Miss Turner. You are about to slay parent-teacher conferences.
Oh, these? Just the most perfect fitting jeans my stylist sent me.
Oh, hello, you, who didn't set one foot in a mall and still looks amazing.
Just share your size, style, and budget, and your stylist sends personalized looks right to your door. Stitch Fix. Get started today at stitchfix.com.
To my stylist.
This look is dedicated to you. Thank you. Thank you.